I would like to start with you, Betty, being the state controller from California, the host state where we're in today. Glad to be here. Unfortunate about that, we brought with us all this European weather, of course.
Yes.
Finally here in San Diego, I thought we were going to have some sun. But you have not only a very, very important role as what you said yourself, CFO of California. That's not a small task, but you also have a role on 2 major pension funds as a board member in California. What is your take on the state's opportunity to drive the 2030 agenda, and how do you see the finance side and the regulatory side coming together on these issues?
Sure. No, great question. And first of all, let me just say welcome to California, welcome to San Diego. Many of you have traveled far, and we are just delighted to have you here. And I'm always just so interested when I come here about all the partnerships that develop almost immediately. Where else can you see Norway and Mississippi already engaged in a terrific partnership? First of all, as CFO, maybe just talking a little bit about my role as the controller of the state of California. So obviously in that role as the CFO, I have my series of green eye shade duties in terms of paying the bills for the state of California, really the independent auditor for all of our state's finances. But in my policy role, I do have a seat on over 70 different boards and commissions that are about financing alternative anything. But the 2 major boards on which I serve are on CalPERS and CalSTRS, the nation's largest public pension funds. And what I will say is that when we look at the institutional investor world, much of our focus is on risk and return. And yet when we look at this globally, I think certainly with the heightened focus on climate change and really catapulted after the Paris Agreement, what we're seeing is really an alignment among institutional investors around the world to not only continue to look at risk and return, which is obviously what the 3 million beneficiaries whom I serve really rely upon, but where are the opportunities? And I think the conversation has really shifted dramatically over the last several years when we look at just what are the business opportunities, what are the things that we need to do to actually respond to some of the more immediate impacts of climate change. And we do this in partnership. And I will say that, when we look at, what's the one strategy that actually is the most effective, we can have regulations, but frankly, those are driven by policy and leadership at all different levels of our government, sometimes even politically tinged. But it's the partnerships that really matter. How we move forward together, how we bring all of our disciplines to really understand that they're all interrelated. And the fact that when we are able to work in partnership, as we have here in San Diego, looking at the ocean planning partnership that the State Lands Commission on which I serve and the Port of San Diego have come together and really begun to see where there are really tremendous opportunities. And it's really right here in this heart of San Diego that we are really creating the leadership with Scripps Institute and others being part of the conversation. But when we talk about opportunities, obviously this is new territory. It's not tested. And when we are looking at risk and return profiles, oftentimes gives institutional investors a little bit of hesitation with respect to moving forward. But I think that is also changing because as we're engaging companies now, and this is really the partnership I think has been the most important with investors finally now engaging companies. When the US pulled out of the Paris Agreement, companies did not. And so this ongoing engagement, part of the whole global collaborative engagement with companies called Climate Action 100+, both CalPERS and CalSTRS are a partner in that. $34 trillion of assets under management, where we are really trying to move companies to understand that climate risk is a bottom line business risk. And we are seeing many companies really resonating with that and not only looking at their own particular operation, but also, again, looking at where their future opportunities are.
Very interesting.
Eric.
Yep.
I apologize, but Claudia has written and unfortunately stumbled and is on her way to the emergency.
Oh, dear.
Oh, my God.
They think she may have broken her foot. So she apologizes and hopefully will be with us later. So
very unfortunate.
Just for to calibrate.
Yeah. Okay. Give her our best regards. Huh? Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Betty. Get back to that. I would like to give the floor to you, Harsh, being a lead environmental specialist in the World Bank. The World Bank, in your division, has added the word blue economy to the formal name of the division. What's the concept?
Yeah. So, as you know, the World Bank has been around now, I think this year for 75 years. And we grant and lend a lot of resources to the developing world for different kinds of development challenges. And this is to the order of something around $60 to $65 billion every year. And we work with about 16,000 staff based in about 140 countries around the world. And there are people there who know people by first name in all of the different ministries, especially that we work with, which is pretty much all the development-related areas that are out there. And many of these now we're trying to see if we can explore both as helping contribute towards the SDGs, as well as to try and see if we can work on the many issues that you highlighted in your presentation, everything from air pollution in Delhi all the way to coastal pollution to marine plastics and so on. So with the increasing interest in these kinds of areas, what the bank has done is my department, which used to be called the Environment and Natural Resources Global Practice, they've added the word environment, natural resources, and the blue economy global practice as of a couple of months back. And to give it a special focus both on trying to see what could be done on areas which are focusing on environment and natural resources, but also in partnership with other types of parts of the bank which are working on energy and other mining and other aspects as well. And in this regard, one of the areas we've been looking to see is how to innovate. Over the years, from I think 1947, when the bank issued probably the first development bond to try and raise money, I think, for a project in France. They've been trying to do a lot of innovations. As you know, in 2008, they helped issue the first green bond, and then they had different versions of it at municipality and other levels and so on. And 10 years later, in 2018, they had the first blue bond, sovereign blue bond with the government of Seychelles. And this is something where there's a lot of innovations possible, as you mentioned, in the future going ahead. So that's something that we want to try and see if we can help support. So we have, as part of this work, also created a special trust fund called Pro Blue, which is focused, which got the support of many governments, including the US, Norway, and Denmark, Germany, many others. And the aspects there are to help focus on fisheries, on marine spatial planning, on integrated seascapes management, and bluing a lot of the sectors that are associated with the blue economy overall. And one of the main elements of that we are focusing on is the use of new technologies. And this is where I've transitioned from my role as being a global lead for watersheds, where we were looking at more land-based integration across different disciplines in a spatial context, to now looking at being a global lead for disruptive technologies, where we are focusing on trying to see how we can help our countries benefit from the many different technological advances that are going on, as well as to help protect them and buffer them against a lot of the impacts that could be the adverse impacts that they could come across as well. And in this regard, there's a lot of interest at the bank on disruptive tech. So one of the things that we are trying to do is learning from a lot of work from people like you to try and see if we can help educate ourselves and improve our own awareness about the kinds of new technologies that are out there that could help us rethink a lot of the investments that we're making in the different countries, as well as to try and see if we can help create better partnerships to build on a lot of the work that's going on here, but focusing on trying to see if we can make these innovations work for the poor. Right? So that's the main focus, to try and see how to take a lot of these innovations and help build the capacity to use it for a lot of the poverty-related work that we are doing, to help both improve incomes in low-income communities and have shared prosperity, but also overall improve goals and help achieve the SDGs.
Very interesting. I'll get back to you on that. Over to you, Ahmed. You're representing one of the big shipping nations in the world, the fifth most valuable fleet. How is the business community looking upon this?
First of all, thanks for inviting me and inviting us, Michael and his team. And good morning or good evening as it feels, still on Europe time. The Norwegian Shipowner Association, we come from a country with 5 million people, small country in the world, but still representing, as you said, the 5th largest fleet in the world. So a big player in that field. Our members were a member-driven organization, so everything I can say and do is what our board members and our General Assembly says. And they've been quite visionary on this field. Back in 2008, they stated a vision in our General Assembly saying that we should have no harmful emission to sea or air. A vision doesn't mean much if you don't put content into it. So that has been our lead star in driving international regulations through the IMO, especially on ballast water treatment, on responsible recycling of ships, and so on and so on. So it's been a lead star for our organization, but also a lead star for our work in the international community of ship owners, the ICS, representing 80% of global shipping. So it's been a lead star for us. So what do we do on on the more concrete projects? Because it's one thing is to have in your annual report that you support the SDGs. That's, I think, more and more company does that, but how can we be concrete on that field? We have had several projects in the Shipowner Association and also amongst our members. But first, when we started the discussion on the SDGs especially, you can look at it at least 2 ways. One way of looking at it is that this is regulations. My industry and most industries, they don't like regulations. That's the negative way of looking at it. The other way, which we took, was looking at the SDGs and sustainability as a business opportunity. So we took that was when me and Eric was colleagues in the Norwegian Shipowner Association. We made this report looking at where are the business opportunities. So coming from ocean-based industry, you look at number 14 and you see life below water and you think, okay, that's where my job is. We looked at it a lot broader. So I think close to a half and 2/3 of the 17 SDGs we see upon as business opportunities for our industry. So, I think that this is coming more and more to businesses all over the world. We have some concrete projects. I will share a short story with you. A few years ago, a big whale stranded off the west coast of Norway. And when they opened the stomach, it was full of plastics. And that raised awareness of the problem that Eric is talking about, the amount of plastics going into the oceans. But as a ship owner association, we are not causing that problem. So why should we identify ourselves with that problem? That was the initial discussion. If we identify ourselves with plastics in the oceans, then people would think that we are causing all the plastics in the ocean. That was the initial thought. But then again, we thought that we have, as an industry, lived on and by the oceans for many, many generations prior. And we will do that for the next 100, 200 years. So we have a responsibility to take care of the ocean's health. So we have several projects. One of them, I will not go into details, but international shipping has 80,000 commercial ships all over the world at any given time. Why not think of all those ships as sensors? We can measure the real-time health of the oceans. So we have a pilot project on that right now. It's only 5 to 10 ships at this time, but the potential is huge. And if you can develop a sensor not only measuring plastics, but also salinity, temperature, and ocean data that researchers all over the world can use to get a better view of what is happening in the oceans right now. That's one example. We have other example of collecting plastics in the ocean. But I know that I have to go landing now. The main task, and that's what you said as well, and that's in our report, climate change. We can talk about plastics, we can talk about responsible recycling, we can talk about all that and do important things, also on corruption. We have to do all that. But if we don't tackle climate change as an industry, we have lost. So I think on our priorities, I know that amongst our priority, it's climate at this time. We have to reduce our emissions by 50% by 2050. That means that we need to have technology by 2030 for a zero-emission, very large ship. We don't have the solution. So we need to work together to develop that technology to make that happen. We think it can happen. We also think it's a huge business opportunity for the first movers. But being a first mover is risky, it's expensive, but we think there are huge opportunities on that field. So for me, it's been, I've spent 2-3 days here in the state of California, met a lot of businesses, politicians, ports, very inspiring, seeing what's happening here. And I think if we can collaborate in regions like Norway, California, other places in the world, I think we can make this happen. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. And I would like to start with following up with you, Amund. Some time ago, I met this young entrepreneur heading a small startup community in shipping. He told me that he thought it was about 5,000 angel-level startups in Medicare, in medical technologies, 5,000 in financial services, and 80, 90 in shipping. Has shipping been sleeping while California has been inventing smartphones and digital services? I think if you look online, most shipping companies don't really have a web page even, you know? I mean, what do we need to get moving for this industry to take off?
Is this our Kodak moment? I think so.
Yeah.
It's a very conservative industry, not only in Norway, but all over the world. But I think I see that in some companies, it's something that has happened the last 2-3 years. For instance, one of our leading members, he is the president of the association as well, Torvald Klaveness. Very traditional ship-owning company, moving dry and wet bulk from all over the world. They have started a digital tech company. And in their vision, that will be the most important part of their company in the future. And that's happening in that company. And you see different things happening within the more traditional conservative organizations. But also another member of us, Valenius Wilhelmsen, they have started this tech community close to their own organization, but not within the organization. So they are developing autonomous solutions, they are developing new services, and so on and so on. So it's a lot happening, but I think there are lots of other industries well ahead of us, and it's very well be our Kodak moment. So we need to be awake.
Betty, I would like to turn to you. Being an elected official, you represent the people of California.
I do.
What's driving the concerns, but also looking for opportunities within people? I mean, are people aware of ocean health, but also the big opportunities going forward, offshore wind and food production and so forth?
Sure. Yeah, I think all of you who are here in California, whether you're from here or not, have been reading about our challenges with the, seems to be the new normal of our wildfires that are plaguing almost every corner of our state now. Also, the challenges that our electric utilities are having as well with infrastructure that not meeting our needs throughout the state. What I will say is this, climate change has a multitude of effects. And, when I think we localize the focus with respect to the impacts of climate change, I will say that there is a heightened awareness, particularly among our coastal communities, around the issue of sea level rise. We know that when we do our climate assessments here in California, it's estimated that by the year 2050, we will have about tens of billions of dollars in properties that will be inundated. And so there is a heightened focus on this. The state is taking some leadership and beginning to do our initial sea level rise assessments with our ports, with our coastal communities, and looking to see what our strategy will be. And there will be some tough decisions that will need to be made. And I think for policymakers, we're really setting the stage for what those trade-offs may be, but also where there are going to be opportunities as well. And so I think there's definitely been an increased role for our municipalities to play, certainly as new technologies are being developed, that many of them are being seen, utilized at a more localized regional level. And so I think there's definitely opportunities there. But I will say this about climate change in California. So we look at this issue really both as a state, certainly a lot happening in terms of different areas of focus with the impacts at the subnational level with our municipalities. But we also look at this very much globally. When we look at our economy, certainly the impact of water and the availability of water is major. It really is the lifeblood of our economy here in California. We are the 5th largest economy. On the other hand, and to what you alluded to, Eric, when we look at the progress that's been made around the world with respect to poverty and our ability to direct many of our resources to developing countries, to poor communities, we also are home to the highest effective rate of poverty among the 50 states. And so when you look at kind of both ends of that of the spectrum, there's so much that has to be done in between. And so we're starting to see issues of equity really become part of the public policy discussion around how we deal with issues of climate change. The availability of safe drinking water has become really an issue of equity in some of the areas of our state that are going without. And then I'm happy to see on this agenda, particularly for this conference, the issue of workforce needs, because we've long heard about the just transition as it relates to the climate change discussion globally. But certainly, what does this mean in terms of our economy going forward? What do the jobs of the future look like? How do we prepare the workforce for the jobs of the future? And so I think the topic really, Eric, is how do we really bring this conversation down to where for everyday people and certainly for our next generations that are thinking about their own future and what we're doing to our precious resources around it, where are the impacts? How are we getting out ahead of them? How do we as policymakers really begin to direct the resources in the most appropriate way to be prepared for that? So I think that I want to just quote something that our former Governor Jerry Brown used to say, and that is climate change won't matter a whole lot, and we're not going to make much progress unless it becomes really a topic of dinner table conversation. And I think we're fastly approaching that.
Yeah. Thank you. I totally agree. And California has been a leader for decades on some of these key topics. And of course, with the technology being at the center of both measuring and tackling climate change,
Yes.
that will be a key stepping stone also for the ocean industries in California to move on. And that leads me to you, Harsh. Seen from the World Bank, I visited the Caribbean Maritime University in Jamaica some time ago. And of course, they want to be a part of this journey. They want, both because they live by and with the ocean, but they also want to take the step up into the ocean clusters and be a part of the blue economy, which is not easy, to have the financial competence, the classification competence, operational shipping, aquaculture, energy competence. It is difficult, but then again, some new technologies might enable them to leapfrog some of the competence hurdles. What is your take on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We have parts of the bank that work with different stakeholders, for example, the IFC that works with the private sector closer and so on. But most of the work in the part of the bank group that I sit, which is in the World Bank itself, works mostly with governments. And there we've always had a challenge that how do you take advantage of a lot of the creativity that's there in universities or private sector or the youth or other parts of society that are out there. And this is true even from where I come from. So I come from Bangalore in India, where if you throw a stone, you'll probably hit a software programmer. But most of the government websites still look like shipping company websites, right? Like in terms of the kinds of technologies that they use for their work. And this is where, one of the challenges we've had is how to make these integrations possible in places like, even in difficult places to work, like the Nile Basin and so on. We've managed to set up some of these internship programs to get university students and faculty to come in and help work with government agencies that are also trying to struggle with the same issues of water allocation, water quality, modeling, and a whole range of other tools that are there. But today, what's changing in terms of the technology, which can cast the net a lot wider, is that training people in using something is very different from training people from developing and making these systems. For example, it's like training me to drive my car. I don't need to know how the internal combustion engine or the electric motor works. I need to know here's a brake, accelerator, steering wheel, go, right? So now this is where the kind of knowledge I need to use these technologies is very different from those to make these technologies. And you still need somebody to repair cars and design new cars to choose from and so on. But in terms of where we are today with a lot of the technologies, even simple things like GIS and so on, it used to be, it still is pretty much the case that only the car manufacturers are driving those cars, right? So in the sense that everybody is trying to become an expert in everything in these things. And once you're an expert at something, why would you work for that government agency anymore? You'll have much better opportunities elsewhere. So the thing that we are trying to focus on is to see how we can build on the automation. For example, I co-lead a hydroinformatics group at the bank, where we were trying to see how to use a lot of the new technologies that are out there from places like NOAA and places like the Group on Earth Observations and a whole range of NASA, NOAA, European Space Agency and others who have a lot of stuff already in the public domain in terms of monitoring systems, forecasting systems, which a lot of you are working on. So how do you make these more accessible through open platforms, open analytics, and also open knowledge and learning platforms as well, so everyone can benefit. So we're trying to see if we can leverage the fact that we're working with a lot of these agencies in the developing world, as well as using some of our platforms like the Open Learning Campus or other things to try and make sure everybody can at least benefit from things that are going on. Yeah.
Very interesting. I like your idea that, of course, I don't know how to make a car, but I like driving it. And of course, maybe we will have a future where you can have automated aquaculture farms, wind farms outside South Africa, Jamaica, and Japan.
Well, a quick word on that one. I went to Korea recently, a couple of months back, for a Disruptive Tech and Ag event that we organized. And we met all of these people because Korea was very concerned that a lot of its population was aging and they weren't people interested in agriculture. But now they have all these super whiz kids who are coming in from technical backgrounds like electrical engineering, who are setting up companies for smart greenhouses and doing things like doing Internet of Things. A version of that is Internet of Plants, where they're trying to have sensors smaller than the thickness of a human hair to go in and see what's happening inside the xylem and the phloem inside these plants. And the way they put it was very interesting. They said, when you go to a doctor, he or she doesn't prescribe you medicines based on the temperature of the room. So what makes you think that you can manage these plant systems without knowing what's happening inside these systems? So they're all slowly becoming big data companies, and they don't care about the sensors anymore, but more how to use the data to get insights which can be used for improving the way these systems work. And, yeah, very clever.
I just you talked about the finance side, and I think that the shipping industry will change significantly over the next coming years. Approximately half of our members are into the offshore oil and gas industry. We have the second largest fleet after the US fleet. They're operating globally. And since the oil price drop in 2014, it's been tough times for them. But then you can choose to lay down or go bankrupt, or you can try to look for new opportunities. And what we see now is that that competency amongst the workers on board, the organizations, the equipment they have invested heavily, that is now being used in the offshore wind industry. So they are taking part in the global wind market that is coming. For now, it's seabed-based windmills, but the next generation will be floating windmills. It's a huge opportunity in all regions of the world. I know that there are pros and cons, but it's a huge opportunity. And using competency from old industry, so to say, from oil and gas industry into this new renewable industry. We have the same example in fish farming. We have been using the Norwegian fjords for producing Atlantic salmon to the whole world for 20 or 30, 40 years. We need to look for new areas to produce now. So we have developed offshore fish farming. Offshore fish farming, where do they get their competencies? From oil and gas industry. It's oil and gas engineers that are building those things. It's our members that are giving the support, and so on and so on. Offshore mining, you mentioned. There are a lot of new things coming, and that's being built on the shoulders of the traditional shipping industry. And I think that those companies that take those opportunities, they will be the future winners. But they cannot do it alone. They need the clusters. They need to talk to smart people all over the world, including California and this region of the world, to get the smartest and the best solutions to take those opportunities. So I think that if we meet again in 10 years, the shipping industry will look a lot different from today. But still, the transport needs in the world, they will increase by 60% by 2050. So we will produce goods, but will we produce other goods than today? I think so. Coal, for instance, the volume of coal will be less, but maybe more proteins and so on. So transport will increase, but we will transport other stuff than today.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Back to you before. I mean, please raise your hand if you have a question. I'll keep on, but I would love to have questions from the floor as well. How can this group of tech companies who are somehow part of the solution address the need for new policies at the state level where you're represented? And what is the best format? Is it like conferences like this, or public hearings, voting
Absolutely.
rights? What's the formula?
I would say definitely step up and participate. You are the innovators. You have solutions that ultimately will need to be scaled up. And I think part of what policymakers are going to have to balance is really finite fiscal resources, but also there are incentives that definitely can be provided through our tax structure, through our tax system, and also through our investments. I will say we mentioned private equity, and we're seeing a lot of the pension funds and institutional investors really take on private equity in a really different manner going forward. Obviously a very high-performing asset class in any portfolio, but instead of looking at private equity as really kind of the strategy of where we're coming in and trying to save companies in distress, we're actually looking for new opportunities and being very future-oriented. And tech will be a major focus for private equity investments. And so the more that you can tell your stories about what you have to offer, the more that you can show us applications, the more that you can really tell us what you need to really begin to think about a future where we can help you scale up. That's the policy work that needs to be done. And I'll just give you an example, because this is probably going to be the next major policy initiative with respect to just climate change generally. And that is, I believe when businesses and investors come together to inform policy, politically, that is really a win-win. We know that the strategies that will be developed will actually work on the ground, and we also know that there will be opportunities for investors. But there is a lot of work right now just trying to corral globally how we are going to develop a carbon pricing regime that really is going to spur not only funding for innovation, but also to hopefully provide proceeds to some of our most severely affected communities around the world as well. And I think for all of us, when we think about this issue, and I don't think there are silos anymore in terms of how we think about this. This is very much about the economy. It's very much about our economic health. And when we are able to look at it that way, I think it really does bring about a whole broad array of stakeholders, including future work opportunities as well. So I just was appointed by the governor to his Future Work Commission. I will say that climate considerations are very much a part of what we have to look at in terms of job quality and work opportunities for the future.
Very good. Ahmed, quick comment.
Just a short comment, and this, you can quote me on it, but it's not very normal that a representative from the shipping industry is saluting new taxes. But I think it's, I think it's key importance if we want to tackle the climate problem and reduce emissions. We need to put a price on CO2. You can do it on a local level, national level, regional level, or on a global level. That is what's being discussed in the IMO right now, to put a global tax on CO2. If you want to reduce it, put a price on it. And what we want is to use that revenue to invest in R&D and invest in measures on board the ships and in the ports and so on to reduce the footprint from the industry.
Very good. We have a question over here.
I do. Ann Carpenter, CEO of Braid Theory and board member of Ocean Exchange. Amandrundal, you mentioned the initiative by Valenius Wilhelmsen. That, I believe, is the investment in Ocean Exchange, which awards a $100,000 prize to entrepreneurs that are focused on solutions in the shipping sector. This year, we had more than 100 applicants, and we had one shipping company participate in funding those. Can you tell me about any initiatives from the Ship Owners Association to put more money where the mouth is to actually support initiatives like this to, at a very grassroots level, provide awards for entrepreneurs who are doing the work, to offer opportunities for pilot projects, strategic partnerships, joint development?
Please.
Thank you. It's an initiative in Norway, to start there, called Catapult Ocean. I know that they have several investors from the shipping industry, also supporting entrepreneurs around the world. Then again, I think that the industry I'm representing can be better at supporting entrepreneurship, supporting new initiatives. And I can only speak for our members. I know that when the times are good, the margins are good, they are better at this than they are right now, especially in the oil and gas industry. They are struggling to survive. In the transport segments, I know that they are a little bit better, and they invest in projects like this. And as I said, either within their own company or supporting initiatives like yours, Catapult Ocean, or a community very close linked to their own organization.
May I also bring you, Harsh, into this? Because I think there are two levels here. It's you can have grant levels or you can have investments. And you have the Pro-Blue Fund, which is on a grant level. And then you have the regular work of the development of the World Bank, which is investments. And we need both the seed funding and the big investments. Can you just...
Yeah, very quickly on that. At the bank, also, we've been trying to see how to support both angles on this by creating, for example, in agriculture, they've done some clever work to look at digital technologies in agriculture in Africa, and to set up these kind of X-Prize type things, which are also compatible with our procurement rules and so on, to be able to provide some seed funding for new ideas which can be scaled up. But basically, every project we support is an opportunity to scale up some good innovative ideas, but also to build into those things like these hackathons or some development marketplaces or other things to help generate new ideas as part of this as well, so which we've been trying to do. focusing on the three elements of disruptive tech that we are looking at. One is how to disrupt the data to decision making type framework, collecting data from sensors, Earth observation, analyzing them with machine learning, AI, other things, and making them accessible on any platform that's out there to help make planning and operating decisions better. The other is in terms of disrupting production systems, which is 3D printing and AI robotics, the whole angle on trying to use new materials and nanotech, biotech, all of these kind of things. And a third element of how to disrupt interaction among people using platforms where it's not so much about the technology, it's more about the platforms for learning and for Uberizing of the world and the gig economy and those kind of things, to try and see how those kind of platforms could also be brought to bear for development.
I think we have a question over here.
Yeah, it's Dr. Michael Snow from Snow Pure Water Technologies. I'd like to inject a note of optimism by saying that when I was a kid living in California, we would drive to Los Angeles and you couldn't see across the San Fernando Valley. And later when I worked there were something like 100 ozone alerts and hydrocarbon alerts every year, meaning these were primary alerts because of smog. The optimism is that because of technology, today, I think we haven't had one ozone alert or one hydrocarbon alert in over 20 years. So problems like this are in fact fixable by technology. I agree, some seed funding, but I think better the investment. And I certainly like the role of government in having rational regulation, which gives a roadway or a pathway for technology companies to develop things, as opposed to government choosing what needs to be done. So anyway, using technology, we can solve the problems that we face.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I didn't hear a question there, but I can comment on it because I totally agree with you. I think we need, there is a huge potential in technology, and I think we cannot subsidize ourselves into the 2030 agenda. We can initiate processes, but it has to be profitable over the long term. And I think the tech companies have shown us that we can have profitability within the climate action sector. And I think we need profitable long-term solutions within the ocean sector. And back to you, Amund, on that, I think scaling up solutions for shipping, well, it's not easy because there is no silver bullet. But companies are looking for projects to invest in because they know if they are the first mover, as you said, on finding some smart design, some propulsion design, some other ways of storing energy and using energy in shipping. It's a market with a huge potential. It's $1 trillion opportunity. So I think back to your question over here, that we might not see the regular grants coming from these kind of traditional shipping companies all over the world. There is an appetite for small-scale investments in startups. But I think there's this room, I mean, it's a big part of the startup community in the ocean. It's not that much out there. So it's more an encouragement to bring more people into this very huge market that will emerge going forward within all the ocean industries, I think. And here we need good regulations. Regulations moves technology and innovation. And I hope that we can see more from California being a leader in this in climate change, enabling maritime nations like Norway, big markets like India and China, really starting to tackle this change. But I would like to also challenge you one more thing, Amund, is that we have seen also disruption from outside the shipping sector, outside the ocean sector, when you have cargo owners demanding lower emissions. So you have a project in Norway which is spearheaded by Yara. It's a fertilizer company, one of the biggest fertilizer companies in the world. They want to lower their emissions in transport. And then they say, okay, we have like 40,000 trucks a year or something on the roads. How can we do something about them? And they went to the shipping sector to challenge them about making zero emission transport across the Oslo fjord on an automated ship. And is this a trend, do you think, Amund? Or is it a one-off that the cargo owners is demanding more from the shipping sector?
From our perspective, we want to see more of that from the cargo owners because, and in this case, Yara, the fertilizer company, they own their own kind of products forever. So they need to fix this logistics. So they can invest with less risk than a transport company like a shipping company is. They maybe have a contract for 2, 5, 10 years, and then make a risky investment like that will be difficult for them. So it's harder for the shipping companies to do bold things like Yara is doing. It's also another example in Norway. It's a grocery logistics company that also wants to do the same, reduce their CO2 emissions. They're also now building an autonomous electric, it's barge sea drone thing, but it's cargo owners going into the shipping industry. I think it's interesting, but what I would want to see more of is a closer cooperation between cargo owners and shipping companies. We have some examples of that where the normal contract was 5 years and there were small margins, so you used old material, you did it the same way you did it last time, only a little better and so on. But now you see longer contracts and risk sharing on this environmental, if you put in new technology, green technology, you share risk with the cargo owner. And I think we will see more and more of that. And also Maersk, the Danish logistic company, they don't see Costco or other container companies as their greatest competitor. They see Amazon as their greatest competitor. So it's a lot happening also on the business model side in business. And representing what I do, I can take a step back and say that this is just fantastic. There's interest in the industry.
Yeah, good point. And I just read that H&M, the textile company, they made a deal with Maersk and Shell to find a way to lower the total footprint of all H&M goods being transported. So that's there are things picking up. It's very interesting. Question from here. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Matt Klassen. Tack för att jag kom hit. Quick question to you, Aman. You mentioned the whale story, and they had a lot of plastic in the stomach. That seems to be something that we see a lot of with birds and around the world. But you said it also triggered something within the Norwegian Shipbuilders Association, like, okay, now we got to kind of wake up to some realities here, but it's a conservative group. So I was just kind of curious. I mean, it would seem to me that this would be a narrative-rich potential if you're going to take that seriously, and how you talk about that, and not just as an organization, but how you might challenge some of the people within the organization to say this is a brand-building opportunity for you to talk about what you're doing and how it's a part of the Norwegian Shipbuilders Association. It's almost like throwing down the gauntlet to other organizations within the Shipowners Association to say, now it's your turn. You either take this seriously or you're kind of just talking BS. You know, so I'm kind of curious about, like, what are the narratives coming out? Like, how are you getting the story out there to the stakeholders who want to hear what you're doing and want to be inspired by something that's normally been not so well seen? Thank you.
So on plastics, and this is, I work on the policy side, and then you try to sometimes be opportunistic and be part of, trying to be part of the solution. And then when the media or the political focus is on something else, then you go to that other thing. But what we tried to do on the plastic initiatives was that we gathered a group of what we thought was the stakeholders, both in raising awareness, the NGOs, but also the different parties that had the technical solutions. So we co-funded a project with all those, including member companies of us, recycling industry, World Wildlife Fund, in a project called circularcleanup.org, if you want to go check it out. It was workshops. We worked for less than a year, and came out with 3 concrete projects. One is city cleanup, not only oceans, but city cleanup. I think in Oslo, 40% of the content or the volume in the garbage, that's coffee cups, the paper cups that you buy on Starbucks or whatever. What can you do? What can you do on the lid side and so on? So that, as a shipping company or a shipping organization, that was interesting, but not that interesting. But the group found it interesting. And then we had a coastal project. I know in Norway, and I know even Hurtigruten, the cruise company, they have passengers asking to clean up beaches in Norway. I don't know if that has been very popular other places in the world, but people going out cleaning up beaches has been something you do when you go on your Sunday trip or just taking care of your own community. It's very popular. I've done it. I live in a coastal. I used to live in a very coastal area, so we did it with the whole school of 36 pupils every year. But the practical problem was that when you had gathered all that garbage, plastics, and so on, it's too much for 1 or 2 persons to get rid of. So we talked to the coastal administration. They have vessels doing jobs to look after the coastal zone and so on, and geotagging those plastic bags so they can pick them up while they're already there. Practical solution and public-private or public-people cooperation. And the last pillar in that circular cleanup project is ocean-going to trawl or harvest, or there are several ways of how to pick up floating plastics in the ocean, but making not only, then you're back to the beaches. When you have picked it up, what do you do with it? So we looked at the whole chain, from gathering, picking up the plastics, the debris in the oceans, and then get it recycled at a facility that is able to do it in a sustainable way. So now we have a project picking up plastics in the Maldives and delivering it to, I think it's Lisbon, and that's being made jackets out of. It's a Norwegian brand called Norrøna. They will produce jackets out of this. It's fantastic branding for the manufacturers, but also solution of a big problem in the Maldives, because they didn't have somewhere to put all this debris or plastics that they had in the Maldives. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it was the first meetings we had were quite special, because it was a group of people that normally don't speak. We don't talk to the recycling industry normally. But then we got together in a room and we came up with these solutions, and now we are working together.
And I think, bringing maritime competencies, ocean competence into these discussions is vital, definitely. Please.
I'm Craig Mclean from NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration here in the US. I'm hearing some very optimistic paths forward, and I'm curious as to whether there's a generational distinction in what you're hearing from the youth or the early career participants throughout the entire spectrum of the components that you're representing or that you're speaking of. Are generations, the upcoming generation, is that making an impact on the direction that we're seeing here? And if so, could you explain how? Thank you.
I definitely think that has added momentum, and certainly the outcry from our young people with respect to the urgency for action. And I think we're seeing it all throughout the world, but I can tell you there is not a CalPERS or CalSTRS meeting now where we don't have a group of youth coming in and either pleading for us to divest from fossil fuels to just looking at essentially saving their future. And this is an outcry and a chorus that is being rung around the world. And if anything, I think it really is, as I said, adding to the sense of urgency for action, elevating our ambition in terms of doing more. And it's not just satisfactory to look at what's currently in front of us, but really along the broad spectrum that we may be an investor, but we also have to be engaged with respect to the policies. You know, California is going 100% renewable by 2045. How are we going to get there? Looking at all of the aspects of what makes for healthy societies and economies, so very high emphasis on water. And then, as I said earlier, you know, this just transition, which is really focused on work and the workforce, and they're visioning what their place is going to be in terms of their future as future leaders, as future participants and contributors to their society. So it really is just beyond the climate, you know, kind of focus, but much more about just our future in general.
Maybe just to add to that, wherever I've traveled around the world working with different, even government agencies, I think a lot of the spark comes from the youth, which are there in the agencies. And also, as you can see in most countries, the focus on trying to draw attention to a problem as well as to contribute to the solutions usually comes from the youth that's out there. At the bank, we've been trying to see how to engage even within the bank and with our clients. For example, I've set up a little team we call the Disruptive Kids Help Desk, where KIDS stands for Knowledge, Information and Data Services, but most of them are reasonably young people, including me, although I started from punch cards 30 years ago or more. So some of the activities that we've been trying to do are to try and see how to bring to bear some of the new generation's skills that are there in terms of accessing information or accessing new ways of visualizing data or analytical tools or learning about disruptive tech case studies from around the world and compile it into a new packaging, including making interactive ebooks on disruptive tech use for different development cases, which can build in a lot of the different cases, but also work directly with a lot of the younger folks that are there in government agencies and also in academia and in the private sector elsewhere, so that they could learn from each other in terms of some of these events. But I think as per the previous comment that was made, in the development space, you have to be an optimist in terms of being able to work on these. But in most of these, we believe that when you're at the South Pole, the wind can only blow north, in the sense of things can only get better over time from a lot of these, and the youth will have a big role to play in this regard.
Thank you. I would just like to just comment on that. I think that's one of the pressure points that all companies feel now is from the finance market, is from the recruitment side. You know, how are you going to recruit young people? Oil and gas companies are really struggling on recruitment. You have it from the client side, of course, and the community at large. But I also think that one pressure point on the future of the blue economy is from business leaders themselves. I think there's a personal commitment to actually have a positive contribution through your own company and your work. So I think we are at a nexus of very positive forces. We just have to be bold enough to really take the big steps to deliver on this. So with that, I think I'll give the floor to you, Michael.
Yeah, but I want to ask you a question.
Okay, sure.
We have a few more minutes. You guys have done a fabulous job. I can't speak on behalf of the Inter-American Development Bank with Claudia Stevenson. Obviously, I've sent her our regards. But the reason that she's here is because they're thinking of creating a cluster in the Caribbean, a blue economy cluster, not a blue tech cluster. But they understand why this is critically important for them, jobs, et cetera, good paying jobs. The SDGs are very important. And over the last year, I've talked to DG DevCo, the development agency for the European Union. I've talked to USAID. More recently in Norway, I talked to NORAD, the Norwegian aid agency, trying to get them to think about supporting clusters in their development and supporting the blue economy in their regions. Traditionally, that aid has been very land-based. It's always hard when a bureaucracy does something for a long time to get them to think further afield. And we talked about blue bonds and blue finance and very high level, I absolutely agree. But for the developing countries, we need to get them into the blue economy. We need to get them realizing there are great technologies that can create good paying jobs. So my question to you would be, at the UN Global Compact and the UN, are you talking to development agencies? Again, it's unfortunate Claudia's not here because they're going down this road.
Yep. Yeah.
And there are several people here in a mission so they can learn from all of us So the funding that exists and tying those together with both the SDGs, but beyond that, economic development, sustainable economic development, I think that's a really important area.
I totally agree, and we have actually a close working relationship with the Inter-American Development Bank, and had a meeting with them last week, and we're going to meet them again next week. We have networks all over the world. Half of our members are from the Global South. And what we try to do is actually not to do traditional development aid projects, but to do blended finance so that they can tap directly into the operational market. We had a workshop in Kenya, and they said, you know, they're competent people, but they don't have the long tradition in the ocean industries. So how can they come into the market? It's like the Maersks and the Wilhelmsens and the aquaculture companies. It's pretty advanced and pretty tough to enter that market. So what we are doing is to see that together with the development banks, but also together with the main global industry, how can we leapfrog, as we discussed, some of these technologies and scale them up more rapidly. So not only through small grants program, but real investments, real finance investments. And that's where we think that blue bonds and so on might be able to pick up and create an environment for them to grow in, basically. And we have to do that because it's one big ocean, and we don't want Amazon to rule it all.
So Eric, coming from New York City, and I know leaving shortly, Aman coming from Oslo to be with us, sharing the experiences and the amazing work that's being done by the Shipholders Association. Controller Yi, for the third year being with us, we can see how important this is for you. You've spent a lot of time trying to promote this in the state. Harsh, you were telling me you almost were in Myanmar. You travel all around the world, but you've come to us today, in this case from Washington, D.C. The four of you have enriched our discussion, and I want to thank all four of you. And before I know that the crowd comes running up to talk to you, I've been asked to get the four of you together to get a photo. So we have half an hour now. I want to thank you very much for being with us and giving us such a rich discussion. So.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're getting around and